On January 11, 2026, Iran's streets pulse with both courage and sorrow. The air is thick with tension, hope, and a sense of history repeating itself. In city after city, the people of Iran pour into the streets, their voices rising in a chorus that echoes through the night. The world watches as a nation stands at a crossroads, its future uncertain, its people determined to be heard. The largest protests since 2022 have erupted, shaking the regime that's ruled for nearly 5 decades. These demonstrations are not isolated or fleeting. They are a tidal wave of discontent, sweeping across the country with unprecedented force. From the capital to the smallest towns, Iranians of all backgrounds are united in their demand for change. What began as outrage over a collapsing economy, where the rial has crashed and basic goods are unaffordable, has become a nationwide demand for fundamental change. The cost of living has soared, and families struggle to put food on the table. Shops are shuttered, shelves are bare, and the sense of despair is palpable. For many, daily life has become a battle for survival, fueling anger and frustration that can no longer be contained. Demonstrations span Tehran, Mashhad, Kerman, and beyond, uniting Iranians across class and region. Students, workers, parents, and elders march side by side, their differences set aside in pursuit of a common goal. The movement has transcended social and economic divides, forging a powerful sense of solidarity among people who, until now, may have felt isolated in their struggles. The chants now directly challenge Supreme Leader Khamenei, calling for a new government and a new future. Slogans once whispered in private are now shouted in public squares, as fear gives way to defiance. The people's message is clear: they will no longer accept empty promises or oppressive rule. This is a direct confrontation with the legacy of the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The images of today's protests mirror those of the past, but the demands have evolved. Where once the call was for an end to monarchy, now it is for freedom, dignity, and a government that truly represents the people. The echoes of history are unmistakable, but the stakes feel higher than ever. The government's grip, once maintained by crackdowns and promises of stability, is being tested as never before. Security forces line the streets, their presence a stark reminder of the risks protesters face. Yet the crowds refuse to back down, their courage growing with each passing day. The regime's old tactics seem less effective against a population that has lost its fear. The unrest is a rejection of a system many feel has failed them on every level. Years of broken promises, corruption, and repression have left deep scars. Now, a new generation is demanding accountability and a voice in shaping their own destiny. Their determination is etched on their faces, a testament to the power of collective action. As we'll see, the state's response is swift and brutal, while the world watches with alarm. International media capture the chaos, and headlines flash across screens from New York to Tokyo. The fate of Iran hangs in the balance, and the outcome of these protests could reshape the region for years to come. In the heart of this storm are ordinary Iranians risking everything for change. Their bravery, resilience, and hope light the way forward, even as uncertainty looms. The world is watching, but it is the people of Iran who will decide their own future. The cost of dissent in Iran is staggering. Human rights groups report over 538 killed since the protests began, most of them ordinary citizens. Security forces account for 48 deaths, underscoring the intensity of the clashes. The government refuses to release official numbers, shrouding the true toll in secrecy. Over 10,600 have been arrested, swept up in mass detentions meant to crush the movement. Each number is a shattered family, a lost future. The silence from Tehran deepens the pain, but for protesters, these deaths fuel resolve. The fallen are now martyrs, their memory a rallying cry for those still in the streets. The government's response is one of overwhelming force. Military units and Revolutionary Guards now flood the streets of Tehran, their presence unmistakable and intimidating. Night after night, armored vehicles roll through neighborhoods, and heavily armed security forces stand in formation, casting a shadow of fear over the city. The message is clear: dissent will not be tolerated. Security forces have resorted to using live ammunition against crowds, and mass arrests have become routine. Protesters are dragged away, often beaten or blindfolded, as authorities attempt to crush any sign of resistance. The scale of the crackdown is unprecedented, with thousands detained in a matter of days. To further silence opposition, the government has imposed a near-total internet blackout since January 8. This digital darkness not only hides widespread abuses from the world, but also cripples the ability of protesters to organize, communicate, and share their stories. Families are left in the dark, unable to reach loved ones, while the outside world is kept at arm's length. Human rights groups are sounding the alarm, warning that this blackout and the government's secrecy may be a prelude to even greater violence. Activists gather in dimly lit rooms, monitoring what little information trickles out, and holding vigils for those who have disappeared or lost their lives. Meanwhile, officials have launched a campaign to delegitimize the protesters, labeling them as terrorists and enemies of the state. In televised addresses and press conferences, they draw comparisons to ISIS, stoking public fear and justifying harsh measures. The government blames foreign enemies for the unrest, claiming that outside forces are orchestrating the protests. State-run media and propaganda posters reinforce this narrative, fueling suspicion and division among the population. Surveillance drones now patrol the skies, and propaganda billboards loom over city streets. Security cameras are everywhere, creating a climate of constant fear and suspicion. The sense of being watched is inescapable. Tehran's leaders frame the uprising as a foreign plot, insisting that their crackdown is a matter of national defense. They present themselves as protectors of the nation, determined to stamp out what they call a threat to Iran's sovereignty. In this environment, dissent is not seen as a legitimate grievance, but as a threat to be eliminated. Security forces confront demonstrators with overwhelming force, determined to silence any opposition. Protesters now face a stark and dangerous choice: retreat into silence and safety, or risk everything by standing up to the regime. Despite the overwhelming odds, many choose to resist, standing defiantly in the face of violence and repression, determined to make their voices heard. Despite brutal repression, Iran's protest movement endures. Protesters have adapted, forming small mobile groups that evade security forces. Even with internet blackouts, activists use satellite links to share evidence and updates. Images of vast marches, burning barricades, and crowds waving lit phones pierce the darkness. Every day brings risk of arrest or death, yet the movement persists, driven by desperation and hope. Chants now target the supreme leader directly, a once unthinkable act. Some even call for a return to monarchy, showing the depth of disillusionment. The fight is no longer just for reform, but for a new future. The spirit of resistance remains unbroken, even as the cost grows. The world has responded with condemnation and caution. The UN and European nations urge restraint, but their influence is limited. Diplomatic tensions rise, with countries like the UK walking a delicate line. Pope Leo XIII calls for peace, while Israel voices support for the protesters and prepares for possible escalation. The memory of last year's Iran-Israel conflict looms large. International outrage isolates Tehran, but real pressure for change remains elusive. Still, global attention lends legitimacy to the protesters' cause. The U.S. has become the protesters' loudest international backer. President Trump's public support is matched by threats of expanded sanctions and possible cyber attacks to disrupt Iran's crackdown. Military options are openly discussed, with U.S. forces on alert and Israel ready to act. This raises the stakes, turning Iran's crisis into a potential regional conflict. American support emboldens protesters, but also fuels Tehran's propaganda, painting the movement as a foreign plot. The regime uses this narrative to justify its violence and rally nationalist sentiment. The situation grows more volatile, with every move watched by the world. The risk of escalation is real and dangerous. Iran's leaders respond with defiance, blaming the U.S. and Israel for the unrest. President Pezeshkian and top officials insist the protests are a foreign conspiracy. They threaten military retaliation, vowing to target U.S. bases and Israel if attacked. The regime leverages its missile arsenal and regional proxies as deterrents. State media reframes casualties as martyrs, seeking to rally support and invert the narrative. These threats aim to intimidate both internal dissent and external foes, raising the risk of wider conflict. The standoff grows ever more dangerous, with little room for compromise. Behind the headlines are countless personal tragedies. In Tehran's Haravi Square, a father and son joined a protest. Ordinary citizens demanding change. Security forces opened fire. The father was killed before his son's eyes. Panic and grief swept the crowd, but the violence only deepened their resolve. This single loss is a microcosm of the national trauma, a family destroyed, a generation scarred. The government hopes such fear will silence dissent, but often it has the opposite effect. Each death becomes a symbol, fueling the movement's determination. The father in Haravi Square is now a martyr, his son a witness to a nation's pain. These stories give a human face to the struggle for freedom. Iran stands at a historic crossroads, a moment that will shape not only its own destiny, but the future of the entire region. The choices made in these days will echo for generations, reverberating far beyond its borders. Years of economic collapse, international isolation, and political frustration have pushed millions of Iranians to the breaking point. In cities and towns across the country, people from all walks of life have taken to the streets, united by a shared demand for change and a better future. The regime's violent response has closed off the path to peaceful reform, deepening divisions and fueling anger. Security forces have met peaceful demonstrations with tear gas, batons, and bullets, leaving many wounded or worse. The hope for dialogue has faded, replaced by a sense of urgency and desperation. If the uprising is crushed, resentment and instability will fester beneath the surface, threatening to erupt again in the future. But if the movement succeeds, Iran faces an uncertain path toward democracy, a return to monarchy, or perhaps even deeper chaos. The stakes could not be higher, and the outcome remains unknown. The crisis threatens to ignite a wider regional conflict, drawing in neighboring countries and global powers. The consequences could be felt across the Middle East and around the world, as alliances shift and old rivalries flare. The world watches anxiously, hoping to avoid catastrophe, but uncertain how to help. News of the protests and the regime's crackdown spreads rapidly, sparking debates in capitals and living rooms from Europe to Asia to the Americas. At the heart of this struggle are ordinary Iranians, women, men, and children, risking everything for dignity, freedom, and the hope of a better tomorrow. Their voices, once silenced, now ring out in defiance and solidarity. Their courage is a powerful reminder that the desire for justice and human rights cannot be extinguished by force. Each act of resistance, each candle lit in memory, keeps hope alive. The world must bear witness, amplify their voices, and hold the regime accountable for its actions. International solidarity and pressure are more important now than ever before. Iran's future is being written now, in the blood, bravery, and unwavering spirit of its people. The outcome remains uncertain, but the world cannot look away.